Hi, Eric. Welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure indeed. I'm spending more and more time these days, both in our sort of core business exit advisory group, as well as on this podcast, talking about software. And it's not surprising. I think we all realise that this is the way the world's going. But I love having software people on here to sort of give some context, because it's like everywhere I turn, everyone's talking about building new software. So, I'm hoping, Eric, today we can sort of unpack your journey a little bit, understand what this journey's been like in software, and I guess where you think it's going. And hopefully we can
Sure.
we can unpack your story around Powerpay and that deal. Yeah, cool. So tell me, how did you get started in this space?
Well, it's interesting, that we're going to talk about Powerpay. So as you can tell from my picture here, I'm not a young man anymore. When in the Powerpay days, I was. So we're going back. We exited Powerpay in 1998.
Yep.
That's how long ago that one was. So that Powerpay was what's now, it wasn't called back then, but today it's called HCM, Human Capital Management Space, HR, Payroll, Benefits.
Yep.
And I got started in that space actually as a management consultant working for Pricewaterhouse. Spent almost a decade working for them out of college. Got assigned to a group that was specialized in HR projects, started to generate an expertise in that. I was a technician, even though in 1983 when I started, if you knew what a computer was, that made you technical. So I was like the most technical guy in my consulting group at Pricewaterhouse. And I eventually got recruited. I got recruited away by a startup company in the HR space, and together we built Powerpay software. And that was around 1990. So as I said, so we exited in 98. So it was an 8-year journey from the time I left Pricewaterhouse to exiting. First exit.
Yeah. And what a different sort of transition, right? I mean, I think you're in software, and the internet didn't even exist at that point. And so, how much have things changed, I guess, beyond just the technology getting better?
Interestingly enough, it's amazing how many things have changed, but some things haven't. So since we're back in the past, I really started working with the internet when I was at George Washington University. I was like one of the first people ever on it. And I was literally playing chess with a guy in Sweden through the inter-university system, which was the birth of the internet, right? Before there was the internet. I was playing chess with this guy. And interestingly enough, obviously the technology has changed dramatically. But what hasn't changed is back then, when you sat at your screen for hours and people walk by, you'd write comments about them, some good, some bad, right? That hasn't changed. It's only gotten worse, mostly bad.
Oh man, I know. It seems our entire world has just been invaded by the internet and all the various apps and devices. So yeah, it certainly is a different world.
When I
Although,
talk
as you
to
say,
people, I always say,
people and human behaviour, I don't think has changed. It's just how we go about it.
Yeah, I like to tell people I was a professional, already a seasoned veteran professional, long before Google came along and messed up the world. So
Eric, talk to me a little bit about, for somebody who's got the kind of experience you've got, I imagine there's going to be a bunch of business owners listening to this thinking about building some kind of software solution. Maybe they're sort of young, already sort of digital native kind of people who are, just see tech as the way forward. But I suspect there's a bunch of more established businesses out there, and probably guys my age and older, who wonder whether they should be building a software solution for their business to help them, maybe improve their offering, whatever it might be. Can you talk us through a little bit about, like, what does it take for a company to develop a piece of software, and what does that kind of roadmap look like?
Yeah, interesting. A company developing software, I was a little reverse, right? Because I was a consultant. So for me, I was, in fact, what drove me nuts was we were producing paper, right? We were writing specifications of a new payroll system for the civilian employees of the United States Army and the United States Navy. So we filled up a room of binders. I mean, and the government paid like millions of dollars for that. I'm thinking in my head, but what did the taxpayer get for that? And the answer was nothing. Wouldn't it be better if we had just built the system, right? So in my mind, even though I was a consultant, I was always thinking of how to automate and how to build and how to do something different, right? So if you're a business, it's interesting because you might be sitting on a gold mine if you think about some problem in your own business, and you think about what it would take to automate and solve that problem. It may be excellent for your business, but it also may be a new business for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting. I've spoken to a few entrepreneurs on the show now who that was exactly their approach. They were running a business. They saw a problem that software could solve. So literally they were building it for themselves. And of course, I think every entrepreneur out there has one eye on well, hey, if it works for me, why wouldn't it work for other people? And probably somewhere in the back of their mind that if they get it right, the software business could be bigger than their core business.
Yeah. So in my specific case, I didn't like the fact that we generated paper, so I actually convinced the partners at Pricewaterhouse to let me build the thing. This was without a client, which is a pretty big deal at Pricewaterhouse. And I promised them I would do it off book. I still got to get my billable hours up, but I also was building this thing basically, on my own time with a bunch of other people who volunteered. And then when we got it done, they were like, okay, now what do we do with it? We're not a software company. So they tried to sell it. And it's interestingly enough, we went and spoke with a guy who they were trying to sell this solution to. And he calls me up and says, Erik, I'm not paying Pricewaterhouse. I'm just going to buy you. So, and that's interesting because he was an entrepreneur, right? And he was going, look, I'm not going to pay Pricewaterhouse X million when all the intellectual property is sitting inside a human being who I could probably get a lot cheaper. So, and at first I told him no, but through stuff that went on in my private life, I eventually turned around and told him, let's do it. And that's how I got started in 90. That's how I left Pricewaterhouse. I became an entrepreneur with this guy to design an integrated HR payroll system to run on PCs. Now, in 1990, our client who was literally funding the development was TRW. I'm not sure TRW was that before, but so TRW at the time was 50,000 employees, and we were about to try to take their payroll off the mainframe and put it onto microcomputer. Couldn't be done. Couldn't be done. Except we did it. So.
Excellent. So just to confirm, so TRW, is that the automotive firm?
They were an aerospace automotive. They were, at the time, they were a big multi-dimensional. As I said, they were based out of Ohio, and I'm not even sure they're around anymore. Okay. I think they broke up.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Cool. So talk to me a bit about the journey with Powerpay then. Like you mentioned it was an 8-year journey. What does it look like from, did you come in, were they already working on a project, or was it starting from scratch?
Yeah.
How long did it take to get up and get the first customer, that sort of stuff?
Well, I had already built most of the code. Now, the code itself, of course, belonged to Pricewaterhouse. But if you're a good tech, it sits in your head. So when I left, I took the code in my head. So it was just a matter of recoding the system and integrating it with the HR product that this company already had. They already had a PC-based HR product. I was going to ratchet on this new payroll product to make it an integrated payroll HR system to run on PCs instead of mainframes. So you could say it was an existing project because I wasn't starting from scratch. I'd had 8 years of consulting experience. I'd already understood how to build this thing. It was just building it a new set of code and making it integrate with this HR system. That being said, it was still a fairly interesting project because we didn't know how we were going to solve that 50,000 person thing. So again, very old. So the fastest PC in the marketplace at the time was a 386.33. Right?
And can you give us some context on what that means?
That's like 1,000 times slower than this phone. You couldn't do it, right? So payroll is one of the first apps that ever went onto a mainframe. ADP, right, the largest payroll processor in the world, right? They were the guys back in the 50s who actually put automated payroll and put it on mainframes, and nobody ever thought it would come off mainframes. So for us, it was like, how the heck were we going to do this? And that took us, right? It was one thing to know the functionality and the design. It was another thing to actually make it operate in the environment that TRW had hired us to do, which was get it off the mainframe. And that one took a while. I mean, we pounded around a lot of ideas, and ultimately, it came down to this: is that the differentiator and the design that we had was that we were a transaction processing payroll, not batch. Most payroll systems say it's payroll time and it goes and calculates. We literally were calculating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every time a piece of data changed, we were recalculating. So because of that, we figured, hey, what if we then distributed the processing out, not on one 386.33, but as many as we possibly need to be able to process 50,000. So we figured out, what was the time frame, what was the acceptable time frame for processing that for TRW to get payroll done? How fast did a transaction run on a 386.33? And then we just figured out how many of these damn machines we needed. And it turned out to be 50 of them. 53. So
wow.
We actually had the cloud and distributed programming a decade before those were even existing. We were doing that at TRW. There's a wall of these 386.33s. They were all, we had one central guy just breaking everything up and saying, you go do your work. That was fascinating.
Wow.
So when we had that licked, then it just became, then it became an exercise to get it going. And about 6 months after we cracked that problem, we had it up and running, and we were processing payroll at TRW. And then it just became running. Then it became running a software company, right? Now, software companies back then were different than software companies today, in that back then there was no internet, there was no such thing as SaaS, right? Software as a service. So you basically wrote software either on hardwares or on PCs, and if you wrote software on PCs, you delivered it on floppy disks. That's it. Yeah. So our software actually was 15 floppy disks to load it up. You had to keep putting these things in the machine until the software was all loaded. And then you had to send updates out. There was no internet, right? So, but from a business perspective, the magic point was, could you get your support, right? Your service, your ongoing maintenance, year in, year out, to keep the system running for a client. You had to get that number, right? Your revenue from that had to cover your costs so that all new sales were for growth. That was the key to being a software business back then. It's probably not very different now, except the delivery mechanism is different and what support and service are. But still, that's what you wanted to get to. In the case of Powerpay, we never quite got there. We were close, but we never got there. And that kind of led us to the decision to exit, right? The question was, were we ever going to get there? And although we could have, do you start looking around and see if there's is there a better home for your product?
Mm-hmm. Did you what does I presume your ideal client for Powerpay was large companies with large payroll.
Back then it was mid to large companies, because it wasn't cheap, right? The software cost about $50,000, so and then it was like 10% or 50% maintenance, year in, year out. So it wasn't cheap. So it was companies of 250 employees or more.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's a typical kind of sales cycle selling a piece of software like this into large companies? Like, how long would it take from first kind of introduction through to making a sale?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I was in the HR space for 28 years, and that sales cycle really didn't change, even though technology did. Right. So the sales cycle to sell an HR payroll product is usually about 3 months. It could, at the low end, it can be very quick. If you're a 10-person company, you're going to make a decision, very quickly. But when you're a big company, it's 90 days minimum. Usually, there's an RFP that goes out. Then there's usually a demo you have to do, right? Then you got a meet and greet. Then they negotiate, and when you add that up, it's 90 days minimum.
Yeah. I actually think, when you said that 90 days surprised me. I would have thought I was going to say back in the day. I mean, even now, large companies and procurement and all this sort of stuff, my goodness. I mean, I thought you were going to say 12 months.
A big company could be 12 months, but usually not. I mean, usually they've done a bunch of work up front. They've already defined their requirements. They've identified a list of vendors. So when we come in, we've already been put on that list. They usually then go from their long list down to their short list very quickly. So then you're usually up against 2 or 3 competitors, and that you got there pretty quick. Yes. And then it was like 90 days to figure out who the winner was going to be.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you were brought into Powerpay. So you were a shareholder in the business?
I made that a requirement for me to leave Pricewaterhouse. I love my job at Pricewaterhouse. I love being a management consultant. And in fact, until I started doing what I'm doing now, I never really liked being in the HR business, or I really never liked owning a company, I should say. I like solving problems. I didn't like solving, dealing with my employees' problems. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Software can be perhaps, well, I was going to say more compliant, maybe less problems, less drama. So what with a business like that? I mean, you mentioned that the maintenance and stuff didn't cover expenses. So, I presume the company was sort of breaking even, or probably had a burn rate for a number of years. How was the business funded? Was it just one benefactor? Did you have to raise capital?
We did not have to raise capital. It was one benefactor. We were lucky enough, the fact that because we had TRW, is that, it was basically funded the project, that got us going pretty easily. So and then although we never got to that nirvana of support covering costs, we always had enough sales that we were about break even. We had some pretty close years, and we had some very good years over those 8 years. Sometimes we were, chewing our fingernails as we came to year end. We had to lay off people. We had, we hired. In that 8 years, we started as a 5-person company. At our height, we at one point had 60 people working. When we sold the business to Ceridian, Ceridian, we were down to 35 people.
Okay. And what was the peak of revenue?
The peak of revenue was $4 million
for the business
annually.
$4 million annually. Okay. So at what point on an 8-year journey I'm curious about how selling and the discussion of selling came about. Was the idea to sell from the very beginning, or did it come up at some other stage? Was there a catalyst? Talk to me about that.
If you go into business and you have a partner, that's interesting. I did. And I wasn't the majority shareholder. I was the minority shareholder. His idea was selling. My idea was not. This was my baby. I created the software. I didn't have this thought of selling it in my mind. But he's the majority shareholder. He did. So he was always looking. Yeah. And he always had fairly close relationships with Ceridian. And actually how he ended up selling it is a fairly interesting story. So when he decided, and I tacitly agreed, and he started to look for potential suitors to buy the company, we actually had a company called Zurich Payroll Solutions. I don't think they're in existence anymore either, but they were being funded by Zurich Insurance. They had very deep pockets. and they wanted to get into the payroll business. And they saw what we created, and they saw the real opportunity that having a solution like ours could be to expand their business across small to large companies with a single set of software. That was what we were selling, right? That's what we had. Small, large, didn't matter because you could run it large. It just scaled the number of machines you had to however big your payroll was. So we actually had a deal in place with Zurich Payroll Solutions. And it was a deal that I actually really liked. It had an earnout in it, right? There was not a lot of cash up front. There was a little bit of cash up front, but it had a very nice earnout. And I thought with their deep pockets and my solution that we could do really, really well. So I saw a very big upside to that earnout. So I was okay with that deal because I saw a big number at the end of it. And I also still got to control the thing I created. They weren't payroll people. So I was going to be able to still control my software, and it was a really nice deal. So I actually had that deal on my desk. And then my partner calls me up, and just before I'm about to sign the deal, really, he says, look, Ceridian had been in and out of our place for years. Ceridian is interested. And I said, Steve, if Ceridian is really interested, because they've said they were interested 5 times before, I said, if they're really interested, they'll be in my office tomorrow because I'm about to sign this thing with Zurich, figuring that there's no way that's going to happen. Well, lo and behold, the president of Ceridian Employer Services, a guy by the name of Carl Kyle, was in my office the next day. And I was stunned. And he and I started to chat, and he got it too. Now, normally people at Ceridian didn't get what I created, but he did. And he saw it as an opportunity to take the platform that we had created and remove all the legacy software that they had, and that this would become their single operating platform. So it was the exact same thing. So between Zurich and Ceridian, those were the same. Difference was the deal. Their deal was all cash up front. So for me, it didn't matter. Yeah, for me,
same money,
I still kind of was leaning towards Zurich, but for my partner, who didn't care, he wanted the cash. And he was the majority shareholder. So we went with Ceridian. And if you're going to become an entrepreneur and you're the minority shareholder, understand you're the minority shareholder.
Yeah. Yeah. Does being a minority shareholder, I mean, obviously you've just given a good example of decisions that, obviously you don't have the final say on things. But what are your views on being a minority shareholder these days? Is it, something you'd do again?
No, I would not do it again. And in fact, I have a number of startups. In 2003, which is the one that's kind of that's progressed now, I would only do it if I was in charge, if I was a majority. I got to tell you, after we sold Ceridian and we started another company, that company did not do well at all. And it went out, it did raise money. And I came in one day and I had papers on the desk that said, basically, I was resigning as president of the company without being told, no forewarning. And it was like, what is this? And the answer was sign the papers or everybody's fired tomorrow. So, that you don't want to ever have to go through in your life if you don't need to. So if you're going to be a minority shareholder, you understand what comes along with that.
That's some good advice there. I as recently as yesterday, had some friends of mine asking me about going into business with other people and investing and buying businesses and all this sort of stuff. And, I had a similar experience as a minority shareholder once. And not only did I hate the fact that somebody else controlled my destiny, because ultimately I went into business to control my own destiny, but I also found out they were screwing me over and doing all sorts of stuff in the background. So it was horrible. I think I swore off being a minority shareholder again, other than, of course, owning shares in a listed company, completely different. You've got liquidity, but
Yeah, you could get.
yeah. So I can relate to that.
Yeah. So, and in fact, so now now it's kind of the reverse, right? With my current companies, or I should say companies, because there's the payroll company we started in 2003, and there's my new non-payroll company called Imagine BC, which we pivoted away, and it's being funded by the payroll company. But so that's interesting because I'm the largest shareholder, but I don't own 51%.
Mm-hmm.
But to sell the company, but I structured the deal such that to sell the company requires a supermajority. Mm-hmm. So they can't sell the company without my approval.
Yeah.
That, right? I could actually I could be removed from the board and I could be fired, but to what end? Because, so it creates an interesting dynamic. And that was 2003. It's 22. So that's 19 years ago. So I've had these guys, and we're all much older and our lives are going in different directions, and they start to have different ideas of what they want to do. And I'm still not a sell the business kind of guy, but I always have to be honest about that.
How do you address that, right? As business owners who, let's say you're in a position where you're protected, but of course, they can't act without you. You can't really act without them. I like the point you just made there that it was 19 years ago and you're all starting to go in different directions. So is this something that you guys talk about? Do you address this at a board level? Is there some way of fleshing out these discussions to avoid potential conflict?
Yeah, it's definitely done at a board level, and we know each other all so long now. So the answer is that since I essentially have a veto, right, to the sale of the assets or of the business, then it really comes down to me. So when I look at it, I ask myself, right, is the number? There's always two questions for me. Is the number right? Right? Is everybody going to get a fair number out of it? So if the number is not big enough, it's just not worth it. Yeah. Because I've been at this too long. They haven't worked at it. Most of them haven't worked at this. I have been working at it, right? So sometimes their number is lower than my number is. So the number has to be the right number to exit from a life perspective. And secondly is I always say, where's the product going to go, right? So, for example, the current company, that the non-payroll company, the other company that I'm dealing with, which is about the monetization of personal information, since our goal is to help people monetize their personal data, that makes Google and Facebook our arch enemies. I can't stand those companies, right? It'd be so it's always, well, what if Google came and offered you $6 billion? The answer would be no. I don't even have to blink an eye.
Yeah.
Just the answer is no. Because there is an ethical, right? And in my mind, the answer is no. Now, here's the good news. If those guys are offering you $6 billion, the company's worth a lot of money. You'll find there's probably a suitor out there who would take care of it and be a legitimate caretaker of it. So you don't have to take and maybe the number's a little lower, but how much do you need, right? But never sell, never. So you have to decide, if you don't care, if you don't have ownership about what you created, then it doesn't matter. But I do. I take it pretty seriously. So, I think of it as a child. I spend more time with the software than I did with my own two boys.
I think I've known lots of entrepreneurs who like their business babies and spend probably a lot more time on them. But I do want to just address one thing that you mentioned there about your number, and I think that's logical. I think most people say, well, look, if the number's not there, it's not there. But I wonder, there's a lot of small business owners out there, small, medium. I guess what I'm saying is they're not these astronomical firms, and I think there's a lot of people when they're going through and thinking about their number. I think when you talk about billions of dollars, as you say, how much do you need, right? I mean, if you can't live on, if you probably can't live on 20 million, maybe there's an issue there, right? You need to address your lifestyle, but
yeah, the big issue, right?
Yeah, right. And so I think for a lot more business owners, though, they've probably got a smaller business. It's not necessarily this astronomical kind of, oh, well, once I sell, the rest of my life is just sorted and I never need to worry about money again. So I guess I've talked to a lot of business owners who struggle to get their head around that number. How do I actually construct that number? And I'm wondering, did you ever have that moment? Did you ever have to sort of think about, well, if I sell this business, is it enough to support me, or was it always just a stepping stone to your next venture?
That for me, if I sell the business, it better support me, because there probably isn't going to be a next venture.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I've never sold, because I want to keep working. But yeah, I mean, it's getting to the number is really self-reflection and honesty, and it comes down to what is an acceptable living standard. Now, I'll quote my mother here, and I'll use a little bit of foul language for a second, because my mother called it "fuck you" money. And what she meant by that was you can wake up every morning and decide, what am I going to do today? And you can say, I don't fuck you. I don't have to do anything, right? So the question is, what gets you to the FU money? Now, if you want to own a private jet, you need a lot of FU money, right?
Yeah, totally.
I know, right? So my number is probably much, much lower than what an entrepreneur might think, or if a millennial entrepreneur was talking to me, they'd probably be stunned about how low my number is.
Yeah.
But I have this, if you can get to this number, then I know I'm free to do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
Every morning.
I 100% agree. To me, I value the freedom more than I value the flashy things. It's, don't get me wrong. I mean, if buying a private jet was the equivalent of my income of me going and buying a small secondhand Toyota, sure, whatever. Like, if you can afford it and it makes no difference to you, but, spend to your heart's delight. But I don't know. For me, I like the idea. I like the FU model. I like to be able to wake up and go, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to do. I'm certainly not going to do what somebody else tells me to do.
Right. And then the next thing, which I don't know how many entrepreneurs go to the next level, which I do, and that is, I have my number, but then there's also the number of all your minority shareholders.
Yeah.
Right? Now, so my guys have been with me for 19 years. So I've got some guys who, if I sold at my bare minimum number, it probably is not enough, given the sweat they put in for 19 years. So that's going to raise the number up, right? Yeah. So you start to have to say, now I don't try to figure out what their number is. I figure my number is good for them, right? If I can get them to my number, then my number is going to be larger. So I always give consideration to my equity, to all my equity holders, right? And is it a fair exit? I don't want to just seem like I'm taking the money because I got mine, and screw you guys. You can't do business that way.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Take me back to Powerpay for a second, and I guess, and this question may relate to other businesses as well, but when you sold that business, or we went through that transaction, how long did that whole thing take from the moment of, I guess, first saying discussions around, well, I think we should sell, to, deals done, contracts signed, etc.?
Well, I think because we had been talking with Zurich Payroll Solutions for probably 6 months.
Yep. Because
we had that deal already done, Ceridian had to match or do better, right? So that got us, within 48 hours of Carl being in my office, we had an offer from Ceridian, and we signed it. So you can say it took 6 months to sell the business. It only took 48 hours to sell it to Ceridian.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, they've got. Yeah, look, absolutely. It's I've often sort of talking to clients about how, if you're going to think about selling, or you're going to sell, allow 12 months. allow 12 months from today if you decided today. You need time to prep. You need time to get out there and engage buyers and blah, 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 due diligence, etc. But it's, I think the fact you're right. I mean, that 6 months of really, was really due diligence for yourselves. It was all that prep and you're all in the right headspace. How did Zurich feel when you told them?
They were a little disappointed. And here's a very interesting thing about that. We sold to Ceridian. I was very impressed that Carl got it. But again, I was very young and I was very naive. And I assumed, and to his credit, Carl did protect us. But what I was not anticipating was how the fiefdoms that existed within Ceridian, that everybody was protecting their turf. So Carl had this vision of getting to one platform, what he just bought. We were the enemy. We weren't, we weren't partners. We weren't teammates. We were the enemy. We were a thing to be. They stalled, so the rank and file, this is a huge company, rank and file, stalled, created problems, right? And ultimately, they stalled long enough for Carl to lose his job. Not because of us, other things. Yeah. But when he went, so did we. And that was like, holy cow, right? Now, if we had gone with Zurich, there was no infrastructure like that. This is all new. They were buying payroll services, but they didn't have fiefdoms. We were going to be the thing that brought it all together and made the business profitable. So in hindsight, from an execution point of view, the Zurich would have been the better deal. But again, majority shareholder, not a day-to-day worker in the business. He wanted the cash.
Yeah. With that in mind, that example, and it's an excellent example. I'm hearing, Zurich, from the interests of the product and the life cycle and the future sort of potential of the product, Zurich sounds like they would have been a better buyer. So with all that in mind, does that impact your decision making as an entrepreneur? If you had that time again, would that weigh into that decision for you?
Absolutely. And I look back and I know we made the wrong decision, right? But if I was a majority shareholder, I would have stuck with Zurich because I was a day-to-day. I did create this. All right, I like the idea of seeing it come to fruition. Ceridian sold as a simple thing, the same concept, but in reality, it didn't pan out that way. We were the enemy. So, if I were the majority shareholder, I would have gone with the Zurich deal. It was a risk, right? It was an earnout. So you had, you had no idea. The earnout was aggressive. If we were able to get the software running and it did what it was supposed to do, we would have made 15 times what Ceridian paid for us. So I was young. I like any young entrepreneur, arrogant. Failing was not even in my mind, right? Of course the software is going to work, right? So how do you walk away from this huge upside? And if you're not involved day to day and you see a whole bunch of cash there, take the cash.
Yeah. But being let's say a more mature, wise man now, you're many years on from this. Do you have the same view about earnouts and stuff like that, or would you take a different view?
I have a little bit different. I have a different view. I still don't mind them, but I'm an older guy, right? When you're young, an earnout looks fine, right? Because you've got a lot of runway. When you're old, an earnout doesn't look too good, right? Because you may never get there.
Well, I guess you got.
Earnouts are a young person's game.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess we've got less opportunities to roll the dice again and have another go and do another startup, right?
Right. That's exactly right. I'm 60 now, and I'm essentially in my fifth. Right. This is the last one. A startup at 60 is pretty rare.
Yeah. Having said that, Erik, if we chat again in a couple of years and you tell me actually I did another startup, I'm not going to be surprised. I think there's something in your blood. And that's cool. Is. Speaking of startups, talk to me a little bit more about Imagine BC and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, so the new venture, Imagine BC, is as I mentioned earlier. So about 3 years ago, a couple of things happened in my life simultaneously. We still the HR business. We still have the HR business. We haven't exited that either. We take the profit from that. We've been investing it into Imagine BC. But I came across technology called blockchain technology. For blockchain's the underpinning technology behind Bitcoin. Moving crypto aside, without getting into a discussion about cryptocurrency, when I finally understood what blockchain technology was and its properties, I thought they were game changing. So I said, so how the heck do we use it? So I'm still an HR company, right? I'm still an HR company. So the first thing I thought about was, as an HR company, we have a single point of failure. We have all this incredibly sensitive information, people's bank accounts, social security number, right? We got it all. We got HIPAA compliant, benefit compliant information, all of it, everything. So if a bad actor breaks through our firewalls, as a medium-sized small company, we're gone. We don't have the ability to buy ourselves out of that catastrophic hack. So that's a single point of failure. So blockchain technology, being a cryptographic distributed network with a database capability behind it, I said, well, that's interesting. So what if we take all that data that if we lost it would put us out of business, and we distributed it back to the people themselves, and they owned it. So, and then when we needed it, we essentially just asked them for permission. So when we want to send them their tax form and we need to produce it with their name, they'd put their key in, we'd produce the form, send them their form. We never had the data other than for that momentary transaction. It's certainly never sitting on our servers. No bad actor can get to your private data. Seemed like a really cool idea, and I convinced my board of directors to let me start a little project to go down that highway, build a self-service module to our HR to incorporate blockchain technology into our HR product. And this is where things get interesting. We were about 6 months into that, and we kind of took a breath back because we saw the product we were designing. We said, what we're really doing here is telling people they should take back ownership of their data. Now, this was kind of the exact time the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke. I mean, the timing couldn't be more amazing. The other thing that occurred at the time was the birth of my first grandchild. And the future looks pretty bleak to me. And if we don't stop Google and Facebook and TikToks and the Twitters, then my grandchild has a very bad future ahead of him. So I said I could sit here and bitch, or I could do something about it. So we actually pivoted away from the HR, took the basic idea of taking back control of your data, but now instead of to produce a tax form, how about actually making money from it, receiving fair value for it? And that's what Imagine BC is. So we've built a platform on top of blockchain technology that allows people to share as much personal data about themselves as they want. We then use that data in an anonymous way, can never be traced back to them, to find opportunities for them to complete surveys, watch ads. And when we found those opportunities, they're presented to them within our app. They get to choose whether they want to do it or not. And if they do, they make money. And they essentially make 70% of what the company is offering to present their ad or have you complete that survey. We take 10%, the other 20% is distributed further amongst the community based on who helped us build the community, blah, blah, blah. So that's our model. That was our model. And right now, interestingly, we never were able to get the Americans to understand it. They don't get it. They don't understand how important owning your data is. We're too rich a country. Earn 25 cents for watching an ad. What do I need 25 cents for, right? Interestingly enough, go to Africa, totally different concept. Pay me 25 cents to watch an ad? Holy crap. So for the past 6 months, we've been busy branding the app for partners in Africa, and we're just about to launch it over there in South Africa and in the very near future, probably in Botswana and potentially Mozambique as well. And we should have millions and millions of people on the platform pretty quickly because they get the value in a heartbeat. And then what we hope
Yes.
By proving the concept over there, we could eventually bring it back here and get Americans to understand it.
Interesting. That's a fascinating model, and it's I mean, I must admit I haven't had a lot of blockchain people on the show yet, but it's I just keep seeing newer and newer different applications for this. It's as you say, I think everyone gets caught up in the currency discussion.
Yeah, forget the currency.
Yes, it's
I mean, the digital currency is inevitable. It's going to be controlled by governments. The governments will control it. I don't see the governments have the guns. They're not giving up control of their currency. That's like giving up control of your government. So that's not happening in my lifetime. but the technology and the technology, you can hear it to solve this problem, solve that problem. Blockchain technology doesn't solve the ills of mankind. But there are certain things it's really, really good at. Protecting information in a distributed fashion, supply chain transparency. It's really good at that. And we're using it for the former one.
Yeah, nice. And shaking up the advertising world too, which, let's be honest, is
and more importantly, is shaking up the horrible model of Google and Facebook, who steal our data and are making the largest fortunes known to mankind on our backs and giving us nothing but grief for it. This is a bad exchange of value.
Yeah. Look,
free email, keep your Gmail. I don't need it. Never pay for it, never use it, never want to. Right? We have paid a steep price for their so-called services. They can keep them. And if I say, would you pay $25 a month to use Facebook? The answer is no. Then it's of no value. If you're not willing to pay for something, it has no value.
Well, as somebody once said to me too, that if you're not paying for the product, you probably are the product. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. We are. Even I am. There are certain like I use Waze, Google's traffic app. I use it so they collect some data on me because there's value to me to know how to beat traffic in the Washington D.C. area. But I have everything turned off. And in fact, it was interesting. You had me, you're just to get on here. You said use Chrome. I never use Chrome. I use Brave. I use the Brave browser.
Okay.
Right. So I'm as protective of my personal information as you could possibly be. But I know what this is out there, and I'm 60 years old. Your classic millennial doesn't get it. They don't know what they've been giving away. But with inflation and robots taking all the jobs, they're going to know in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
it's not too distant future. They're going to realize what they've given away, and they're going to want it back.
Yeah, interesting. Erik, I'm really appreciative of you coming on and sharing your story. There's been a number of really good insights here. I'll ask you in a moment if there's any sort of parting tip, or tips that you'd like to share with your fellow entrepreneurs. But before we get to that, I mean, are you? How can people get in contact? Are you happy for people to reach out and connect with you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. They can reach me at Erind, ERIND, at imaginebc.net. Feel free. Just, put in the subject that you heard me on Simon's podcast, and I'll definitely respond. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't have any problem. And, I kind of throughout our talk was saying the things, the lessons I've learned. So I don't necessarily have any parting tips, but I will tell you, be very careful about being a minority equity holder.
Yeah.
Especially if you're the creator, right? If you created the technology and you really feel an ownership to it, you don't want to be the minority shareholder. It probably is not going to end well for you.
Yeah. It's a very good tip into itself. Erik, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. You've been very generous. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Simon.